Tonight, we ascend into the snow-swept ridges of the Ural Mountains. February 1959, a land of frozen silence, blizzards, and secrets that whisper through the pine. 9 students set out, notebooks in hand, ambition in their hearts, chasing peaks and daring each other toward Kholat Syakhl, the dead mountain. But instead of triumph or laughter, the slopes birth a nightmare, a tent sliced open from the inside, footprints spiraling into nothing, bodies scattered across the snow, some half-dressed, some bearing injuries that mocked human understanding. They had names, faces, families. But by the end of that night, the mountain claimed them all. And within weeks, the world stared in disbelief. Headlines questioning the inexplicable, theories clashing like knives in the cold. What happened at Dyatlov Pass? The investigators called it an unknown compelling force. The mountains called it silence. And decades later, we're still listening to that wind. Snowflakes drifted like powdered glass over the Ural Mountains, whispering secrets that no human should ever hear. And yet, they did. On the night of February 1st, 1959, the last thing 9 young hikers ever left behind wasn't a scream or a signature. It was a notebook. Inside, a few trembling lines scrawled by Igor Dyatlov himself. The wind is too loud. I cannot sleep. Something moves beyond the trees. I feel eyes. Something is wrong. Too wrong. That was it. No elaboration. No final plea. Just words crawling across the page, smeared in frozen condensation. Almost like they'd been written in panic. What followed is a tableau so bizarre that it defies comprehension. A campsite cut open from the inside, bodies scattered across the snow, some stripped of clothing, others bearing injuries that look like they belonged in a horror story drafted by mad surgeons. One hiker, half naked, feet bare in the frost, his tongue missing. Another, inexplicably burned, though there had been no fire near him. And yet the slope, the tree-lean, the endless cold, it didn't care. It was just there, indifferent, swallowing everything in its path. And here's the thing. The official report, the state's version, insists this was an unknown compelling natural force. That's bureaucracy speak for we have no idea, and will never admit how horrifyingly strange this is. But to stand at that ridge and imagine what these 9 people went through, stripped of warmth, hunted by something unseen, and knowing instinctively that help would not come, well, it will leave your chest rattling for hours. Footprints leading out from the tent like some kind of insane choreography. Snowcake trees with branches snapped at impossible angles. A sense of deliberate urgency that no sane person can fake. The very air seems heavier when you read the testimonies, as if the Ural Mountains themselves had pressed a hand over the mouths of the hikers, silencing them forever. And yet, beyond all the forensic reports, beyond all the theories, beyond the absurd guesses about military experiments and secret tests, there's one thing you can't ignore. Terror isn't just in the mind. It's tactile, it's physical. You can see it in the positioning of their bodies. You can feel it in the torn tent flaps frozen mid-motion. You can almost hear in the wind that has long since swept across the ridge. This isn't a mystery you read and shrug off. It doesn't resolve neatly. It refuses to obey logic, chronology, or sanity. And somehow, decades later, it keeps bleeding through every newspaper clipping, every dusty photograph, every hushed discussion in the shadow of the Urals. Because whatever it was that night, it left fingerprints on reality itself. The Dyatlov Pass Incident isn't just an unsolved mystery. It's a wound in time, a scream trapped in ice, and a reminder that sometimes nature, or something wearing nature's face, doesn't negotiate. It hunts, and it keeps secrets that we are only beginning to comprehend. February 1959. The Soviet Union is a nation stitched together by snow and suspicion, a place where whispers carry further than gunfire. The Ural Mountains rise like jagged teeth, slicing the horizon with white-edged menace. Cities huddle under gray skies, and villages hunker against the wind, their wooden walls shivering with every gust. Out here, in this frozen wilderness, The state's reach thins, and reality itself feels sharper, colder, more immediate. The Dyatlov group, students, athletes, explorers, plan to trek into this wilderness not as rebels, but as seekers of something purer than life in the city. Freedom, challenge, a communion with the mountains. They were part of a generation molded by post-war survival, brimming with energy and naive invincibility. The kind of arrogance that thinks snow is merely a picturesque backdrop. At the time, mountaineering wasn't just sport. It was ideology, endurance, discipline, courage. They were patriotic virtues. The hikers trained, pushed themselves, documented everything with meticulous notebooks and cameras, all under the watchful eyes of the state's mountain clubs. Every journey carried the subtle pressure of performance, a silent expectation that they would not fail. But the Urals don't care about ideology or training or bravado. Their slopes are merciless, their winds capable of stripping flesh and sanity alike. Avalanche paths lurk like predators, and weather can change faster than the blink of a cold, frostbitten eye. One moment, you might be laughing at the absurdity of the cold. The next, you're staring down at a landscape that seems designed to erase you entirely. The region around Kholat Syakhl, the Dead Mountain, as the local Mansi people called it, was remote even by Ural standards. Sparse forests give way to slopes where visibility vanishes in a whiteout. Ancient rivers carve hidden valleys, and creeks disappear beneath snowdrifts, leaving nothing but a whisper and an icy echo. To the locals, these mountains weren't just challenging. They were sacred and dangerous. Legends of spirits, vengeful presences, and travelers never returning weren't bedtime stories. They were warnings carved into memory by centuries of frost and death. Into this world, 9 students ventured. Their journals are filled with optimism, playful bickering, lists of supplies, plans to conquer peaks and measure altitudes. And yet, beneath every entry, if you read carefully, there's a faint hum of unease, wind patterns noted, frostbite warnings, the way some of them seem almost too conscious of the dark, long nights ahead. It's as if the mountains themselves were already nudging at the edges of their minds, testing their confidence, whispering that humans were ephemeral and naive, and that some forces were better left untouched. This wasn't just a hike. It was a collision course between youthful hubris and an environment so alien, so indifferent, that its cruelty would be recorded not in propaganda, not in victory, but in bodies frozen into grotesque arrangements, in tents cut open from the inside, and in mysteries that would outlive everyone involved. The stage was set, and the audience, the world, would only get glimpses of the horror that unfolded. They were 9, not criminals, not soldiers, not madmen, just 9 students with more ambition than sense, marching into the Ural wilderness armed with notebooks, cameras, and the kind of naive optimism that makes you think you can outrun fate. Igor Dyatlov, the de facto leader, was a physics student, clever, methodical, but stubborn. He had the kind of energy that convinces people to follow you even when their instincts are screaming stop. Then there was Zinaida Kolmogorova, whose diary entries reveal a mixture of excitement and quiet reflection, the kind of girl who notices the way sunlight hits snow, and can later describe it like a painter trapped in a physics lab. Rustam Slobodin, brave almost with recklessness, would mock the cold with a grin, insisting it was barely uncomfortable. Yuri Doroshenko, curious, always scribbling observations, trying to rationalize the irrational. Each had a role, each a personality that combined into a fragile, combustible harmony. They weren't just climbers. They were chroniclers. Diaries and camera reels filled with smiles and absurd jokes. What they didn't know was that these records would become some of the most haunting evidence ever left behind. You can almost see the pages as they were written. Laughter in graphite, optimism in ink, a subtle dread hiding in the margins like a shadow stretching longer than it should. What's striking is how ordinary they were. This wasn't a cult, a secret society, or a mission doomed by ideology. These were young people testing their limits. And maybe that's why what happened next feels so much like a betrayal. Because the world they thought they understood, the one where snow is just frozen water, where night is just dark, where frostbite is a nuisance and avalanches are theoretical, didn't exist that night. Each one of them carries a fingerprint of normalcy. You read Dyatlov's meticulous planning, Slobodin's reckless optimism, Doroshenko's scientific curiosity, and you feel a cold shock. These weren't thrill seekers in a horror movie. They were human beings. And every choice they made, every tent pitched, every step into the snow, every laugh shared around a fire, became a thread in a tapestry that would unravel into incomprehensible terror. There's a certain cruelty in that realization. The more you study them, the more you realize the tragedy isn't just that they died. It's that the mountain knew them, studied them, and orchestrated a finale so alien that the human mind can't fully grasp it. They didn't fail. The world failed them. Or maybe something beyond the world did. When you look at their photographs, it's impossible not to feel a grotesque irony. Smiling faces framed by snowy caps, notebooks in hand, oblivious to the fact that each snapshot is a postcard from oblivion. They are everywhere and nowhere, frozen not just in the snow, but in history and mystery, in the kind of nightmare that refuses to let go. And that is a human anchor in a story that otherwise drifts into pure, icy madness. Because these weren't legends, they were people. And what happens when ordinary humans meet extraordinary, incomprehensible forces is exactly what Dyatlov Pass immortalized: confusion, fear, and horror that even decades later still bites at your chest. The first ripple of unease came quietly. February 1st, 1959, a day that began like any other winter expedition, but ended in a way no one could rationalize. The hikers set up camp on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, laughter and chatter drifting across the white, indifferent expanse. But even as they pitched their tents and marked trails, subtle signs whispered that something had shifted, something that had nothing to do with frostbite or fatigue. The tent was found later, bizarrely sliced open from the inside, a desperate improvisation that screams panic. But in that moment, when the group first left their tracks across the snow, no one could have predicted the horror looming ahead. They had been meticulous, layers checked, maps studied, gear inspected. But there's a point where preparation hits the wall of the incomprehensible. That night, they reached it. Eyewitnesses, well, not exactly witnesses in the traditional sense. The mountains themselves. Snow drifts undisturbed save for footprints leading away from the tent in uneven patterns. Some barefoot, some half-dressed, as if reason had dissolved mid-step. Then scattered evidence. Jackets abandoned, supplies left untouched, cameras rolling in the snow, frozen in the cold snap of human terror. It's like watching someone try to escape gravity itself. And then the bodies began to appear. Not in a neat line, not with any orderly explanation. Dyatlov first, partially clothed, lying near the tree lean. Slobodin a few dozen meters away. Twisted as though the cold itself had assaulted him. Others were discovered in later weeks. Some buried in snowdrifts, others showing injuries so anomalous that forensic reports still hedge their words, inconsistent with human intervention. The first disturbance wasn't a sound, or a scream, or shout. It was absence. The absence of order, the absence of sanity, the absence of predictability. This is where it gets truly disturbing. Footprints lead downhill, away from a fire, away from shelter. Some are straight, some zigzag, some circle back in patterns that suggest disorientation or compulsion. And the tent? Cut open like some grotesque portal. Nothing suggests a conventional threat. No struggle, no robbery, no predator. Just humans reacting to something unseen. The diary entries hint at it. Igor's last notes, barely coherent. Wind too loud, eyes beyond trees, cannot sleep, something wrong. There is no punctuation strong enough to capture the dread in those lines. And yet, even in the calmest handwriting, you can feel the edge of terror creeping in. That first disturbance wasn't just the cutting of the tent or the footprints in the snow. It was a moment the natural world, or something masquerading as it, whispered a promise. You are no longer in control. And for 9 young people, full of ambition and vitality, that whisper became a roar that echoed across the Ural slopes and would never fade. Here's where logic starts to slip on the ice. Because after the first disappearances, everything gets murky. Eyewitnesses, again, are only the mountains and the snow, and they tell a story that no human mind wants to parse. Bodies found in impossible positions, footprints vanishing into nothing, tents shredded from the inside. Each clue seems to contradict the last, forming a labyrinth where reason goes to die. Some of the hikers were found near the forest edge, their clothes scattered like confetti in the wind. One half naked, another fully clothed, yet lying face down in the snow. Others were discovered deeper in the woods, some with severe chest trauma, yet with no external wounds, like the snow itself had beaten them. One even had a missing tongue, as if some invisible force had been hungry for more than warmth. These contradictions pile up, forming a grotesque mosaic of impossibility. Local villagers whispered about the mountain. The Mansi people, the indigenous custodians of this land, had always called Kholat Syakhl Dead Mountain. Their stories weren't merely superstition. They were warnings. Travelers never returned. Fires flickered in the distance, seemingly with no source. Some spoke of strange lights on the slopes, colors that danced and swirled in unnatural patterns. The official investigators dismissed this as folklore, but the layers of evidence suggested a whisper of truth. And the cameras. Oh, the cameras. Frames filled with frozen smiles, snow-draped slopes, shadows that don't belong, and subtle distortions in the light. They're innocuous at first glance, but when you study them, a pattern emerges. Faces stiff with tension, not fear exactly, but a recognition of something alien. Something that doesn't obey reason, gravity, or morality. And yet, each photograph is precious testimony, proof that these 9 humans had no idea what was circling them. Every attempt to make sense of the sequence of events leads to contradictions. Footprints vanish and reappear. Clothing is removed in some cases, partially burned in others, and the logic of survival collapses. One theory suggests avalanche panic. Another whispers about military tests gone wrong, but nothing fully reconciles the evidence. No natural phenomenon explains fractured ribs without external trauma or missing eyes and tongues. No human enemy could act with such precision while leaving others untouched. And here's the thing. Each time the investigation tries to close a story, it cracks open in the cold wind. Reports are amended, details omitted, contradictions glossed over. Journalists, locals, and amateur sleuths alike are left staring at snow-blanketed slopes, the trees bending under their own weight, and wondering, what exactly did the hikers see? What forced them from the tent? What hand, or force, dragged them across that frozen canvas? The Dyatlov Pass mystery deepens not because the evidence is missing. It's because it's too full, too complex, too grotesquely intricate for any tidy solution. Each discovery spawns another question. Each explanation is undermined by the evidence itself. And through it all, the mountain stands silent, patient, almost amused at human attempts to rationalize terror that is, by design, unexplainable. The investigation began as a bureaucratic march, officials in padded coats trudging across snow like ghosts on a mission to tick boxes. But the deeper they dug, the more the mountain laughed at them. Bodies recovered in stages. First the ones closest to the tent, then the ones deeper in the forest, and finally, after weeks, those hidden under ice and snowdrifts. Medical reports couldn't make sense of the injuries. Fractured ribs, skull damage, internal trauma resembling a car crash, yet no external marks. How do you reconcile that? You can't. The investigators were thorough, or at least they tried to be. They measured the slope, mapped footprints, cataloged clothing, took temperature readings, and interrogated locals. But each fact became a fractal of confusion. Tent slashed from the inside? Check. Clothes missing, partially burned? Check. Evidence of radiation? Yes. Strangely faint traces on some garments. Eyewitness reports of strange lights? Dismissed as hysteria. Yet, the anomaly persisted. The hikers had left a campsite in perfect order in some respects and utter chaos in others. Theories exploded. Avalanche. plausible superficially. But slopes weren't steep enough, no obvious trigger, and injuries inconsistent with a normal slide. Military tests. The Cold War was in full swing. Secret weapon experiments were whispered about. Some said it was a parachute mine. Others suggested infrasound-induced panic. The kind of low-frequency terror that makes humans flee into the cold, stripping off clothes in delirium. And then the paranormal and extraterrestrial corners of speculation. UFOs, Yeti, cursed spirits of the Mansi Mountains. Ridiculous? Maybe. But when ribs break without marks, tongues vanish, and footprints lead to nowhere, ridiculousness starts to feel almost credible. Amateur sleuths and historians return over decades, piecing together diaries, photographs, and maps. Some noticed inconsistencies in the official reports. Evidence destroyed or glossed over. Clothing with traces of radiation inexplicably removed from files. Witness accounts quietly dismissed. Even the forensic reports alternated between precise detail and vague pronouncements. It's as if someone had decided the world wasn't ready for full story. Oddly, one of the most haunting aspects is the group dynamics itself. Diaries and personal accounts suggest no conflict, no panic leading up to the tent escape. And yet, the final moments, who ran first, who stayed behind, why some stripped to near nothing, are left entirely to conjecture. Modern simulations of panic and extreme cold suggest humans behave irrationally, but they don't account for the weird trauma, the missing body parts, or the strange burns found on some hikers. The Dyatlov Pass investigation became a mix of state procedure, local legend, and enduring obsession. Every explanation has holes, so large you could drive a sled full of frozen bodies through them. And that's precisely why this case refuses closure. It's an open wound in the record of human experience, a reminder that sometimes no amount of logic, maps, or forensic expertise contain the raw, indifferent terror lurking in the mountains. And then, as if the universe was done toying with patience, a new layer of grotesque absurdity appeared. Weeks after the initial search, more bodies were found, deeper in the forest, sprawled in positions that no sane mind can rationalize. The patterns, the distance from the tent, the scattered clothing, the bizarre injuries, screamed that something had been orchestrating terror with a meticulous cruelty. The official narrative strained against reality, trying to fold it all into unknown, compelling natural forces. But even that phrase began to buckle under the weight of contradictions. One body, Yuri Doroshenko, was discovered under 6 feet of snow, his hands raised as if in surrender. Another, Ludmila Dubinina, showed signs of severe chest trauma, so forceful that experts equated it to a car crash. And yet there was no collision, no machinery, no human weapon. The radiological traces found on some clothes fueled whispers of secret tests. Soviet military experiments, atomic fallout, chemical exposure. But even those hypotheses collapsed under scrutiny. Too random, too inconsistent, and nothing official ever confirmed. Witnesses reported strange lights over the ridge around the time of the incident. Some described them as bright orange or violet glows dancing above the snow, moving erratically. Military aircraft were active in the region, of course, but the colors, the patterns, the timing, none of it fit standard tests. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about hikers lost in a blizzard. It hinted at something deliberate, something unnatural, something that could manipulate human perception and leave a tableau of terror without ever being seen. The breakdown of logic wasn't confined to injuries or environmental anomalies. Diaries revealed that the hikers felt unease long before the tent was slashed. Igor's notes mention wind and eyes beyond the trees. Zenaida's entries hint at a subtle panic creeping through the group. This wasn't sudden. It was a slow, creeping horror, building until rational thought gave way entirely. And yet, when they fled the tent, it wasn't a coordinated escape. Some ran barefoot into blizzards, others staggered. Some stripped clothing as if compelled by a force beyond self-preservation. Even the investigators began to unravel under the contradictions. Reports conflicted, details were lost, photographs withheld. Colleagues of the hikers, family members, journalists, They all sense the same thing. The mountains themselves have become the primary witness, recording a truth that no human procedure could fully extract. The deeper you looked, the more you realized that this wasn't just an accident or misjudgment. Something or someone had orchestrated a breakdown that left 9 young humans scattered across ice and snow, frozen into their final, cryptic poses. And here's a horrifying pivot. Nothing in the evidence points to a single neat cause. Each new discovery fractures previous theories, exposing the abyss between what we understand and what actually happened. The Dyatlov Pass doesn't just break lives, it breaks logic itself. It's a story where every clue twists into a riddle, every pattern dissolves into chaos, and every explanation carries the weight of its own impossibility. The mountain won, the world didn't, and 9 lives were left as proof that the line between survival and incomprehensible horror can be thinner than the ice beneath your feet. Officially, the case concluded with a phrase so sterile it almost mocks the horror, caused by a compelling natural force. That's it. No fingerprints, no enemy, no haunted explanation, just a shrug wrapped in bureaucratic language. The authorities closed the files, photographers archived the evidence, and the world moved on, assuming, perhaps naively, that closure had been reached. But for anyone who reads the reports, studies the photographs, or traces the footprints, closure is a cruel joke, because the questions don't stop. Why did the hikers cut their way out of the tent? Why did some remove their clothes in sub-zero temperatures? Why were some bodies found with traumatic injuries that defy explanation, while others seemed untouched by violence? What caused the mysterious radiation traces on clothing? Even decades later, these questions echo across the snow like a chorus of the unspeakable. Investigators return periodically. Modern forensic teams examine remains with better technology. Simulations of avalanches and hypothermia were run. Each analysis confirms fragments of the official story, but none can reconcile all anomalies. The injuries alone are impossible to attribute solely to an accident, yet the absence of evidence for human attack rules out foul play in the traditional sense. It's a puzzle with pieces that don't fit, edges that refuse alignment, and a solution that might not exist. Public fascination refuses to die. Books, documentaries, online forums. People obsess over the minutiae, from the photographs of frozen smiles to Igor Dyatlov's cryptic diary entries. Amateur sleuths reassemble the timeline, debating theories from secret military tests to infrasound-induced panic, even to paranormal explanations. Each hypothesis carries its own burden of improbability, yet none can be dismissed entirely, because the mountain doesn't conform to reason, and the lingering questions aren't merely academic. Families of the hikers never receive complete answers, and the sense of injustice persists. The Ural slopes, silent witnesses to everything, keep their secrets. Snow drifts shift, forests reclaim evidence, and the night wind whistles across the ridge exactly as it did on that fatal February night. Time passes, but the mountain remains unchanged, a cold, indifferent sentinel. So yes, there's a resolution, in the narrowest sense. The hikers are gone, the files closed, the government statement made. But the lingering questions, the inconsistencies, the strange injuries, the lights in the sky, the radiological anomalies persist, haunting anyone willing to look closely. For those 9 young people, for their families, and for anyone who dares read the records, the Dyatlov Pass is a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to remain a frozen whisper in the snow, challenging human understanding and refusing closure, no matter how desperately we crave it. The mountain didn't just claim 9 lives. It claimed something far larger, a sense of innocence, a belief that the world was orderly, that survival followed rules. In the aftermath, families grieved in a fog of official indifference and unanswered questions. Villagers whispered about curses and spirits. Soviet authorities tightened controls on hiking expeditions, introducing stricter permits, harsher oversight, as if bureaucracy could prevent the incomprehensible. But the Ural slopes ignored paperwork. Over the decades, the Dyatlov Pass Incident became a cultural touchstone, a story told in whispers, documentaries, books, and internet forums. Every generation discovers it anew, fascinated not just by tragedy, but by the grotesque, inexplicable elements. The cut tent, the shredded clothing, the bodies scattered across impossible terrain. It feeds something primal, a need to confront forces we cannot understand, to peer into chaos and shiver. Psychologists and survival experts dissected the hikers' decisions endlessly. The panic-induced stripping, the flight into deadly cold, the uneven distribution of injuries, all became case studies, not to prevent future tragedies entirely, because some forces refuse prediction, but to teach how the human mind unravels when reality itself turns hostile. Their legacy is not only in memorial plaques, but in knowledge carved from horror. Every mountaineer, every adventurer, carries a shadow of Dyatlov Pass in the back of their mind. Respect the mountain. Respect the unknown. The mountain's imprint stretches beyond academia. Artists, filmmakers, even musicians draw from the eerie tableau of that night. Faces frozen in photos, journals trembling with fear, footprints vanishing into nothing. These images ripple outward, haunting the collective imagination. The event became more than history. It became legend, a cautionary tale, a morbid fascination with a fragile line between human bravery and folly, knowledge and ignorance, life and incomprehensible death. Even official interest resurfaces periodically. In 2019, after decades of speculation, Russian authorities reopened the case for review, attempting to apply modern techniques to ancient evidence. They cited avalanche as a likely cause, plausible, partial, but unsatisfying. The public reaction? Skepticism, obsession, fascination. Because Dyatlov Pass teaches a lesson far deeper than physics or terrain analysis. It reminds us that some forces are bigger than humans, colder than snow, and stranger than our wildest imaginations. And so the mountain endures. Each winter, the wind whistles through the same ridges, undisturbed by the passage of time. Each snowflake settles in patterns no human mind can predict. And the story persists, passed from generation to generation, a warning and an enigma that some tragedies are bigger than investigation, bigger than theory, bigger than comprehension itself. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, in all its grotesque, baffling glory, remains a testament to the fragile, temporary, and utterly expendable nature of human life when confronted with the unthinkable. You stand on the edge of the Ural slopes in your mind and try to imagine it. 9 young people, alive one moment, gone the next, leaving behind only frozen footprints and notebooks trembling with terror. There's something almost poetic in that. If poetry could kill, but it isn't poetry. It's brutal, indifferent, merciless. And it asks a question that doesn't want an answer. What happens when humans, full of optimism and overconfidence, collide with something vast, ancient, and utterly alien in its logic? Consider the scene. A tent cut open from the inside. Hikers fleeing into minus 50-degree air. Some stripped to near nothing. Bodies later found with injuries inconsistent with any earthly force. Tongues missing, eyes missing, some burned, some frozen, some seemingly untouched. An array of anomalies so bizarre it makes the word impossible feel inadequate. And yet, this isn't fiction. Every photograph, every diary entry, every investigative report testifies that it happened. Perhaps the most chilling insight is the patience of the mountain itself, or whatever force wore its face that night. Nothing in the evidence suggests hasty action. Nothing suggests randomness. The terror was precise, orchestrated, and quiet in its cruelty. Humans fled instinctively, only to be consumed by elements, by their own bodies, by the unknowable. And then silence fell. Weeks, months, decades passed. Snow buried the traces. Trees swallowed the evidence. And still, the story emerges like a pulse you can't ignore. Dark humor creeps, and when you realize how human explanations fail, avalanche infrasound, secret military tests. None satisfy the grotesque choreography, recorded in ice and snow. It's as if reality itself shrugged and whispered, "Good luck making sense of this." And maybe that's a lesson. Some forces don't bend to understanding. Some terrors are designed not to be solved, only survived, which In this case, no one did. When you close the file on Dyatlov Pass, what lingers isn't just a horror death or the grotesque details. It's a humbling, nauseating awareness that the universe is far larger, far stranger, and far more indifferent than we allow ourselves to admit. And sometimes on a quiet winter night, if the wind is right, you can almost hear it. The soft, ghostly echo of 9 lives intersecting with the incomprehensible, leaving behind footprints that vanish into nothing, and a warning for anyone bold or foolish enough to follow. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.